as you are of the age at the time your service would begin, then you would be fine, much like when you go to register to vote. As long as you're going to be 18 by the time the election rolls around, you can register to vote at 17.
Do we think that's true for 25 now?
Again, I don't know the answer to that question specifically. I didn't look at that, but I would make the presumption. I think it's.
And I'm not saying I have, a preference necessarily. I just want it to be clear which it is.
Any other question? Yes, Mr.
Well, if I may, just going off of what Councilmember Cash just said, I do believe in my reading of the charter that it is that upon election you have to, so upon election you have to have attained the minimum requirements. So in this hypothetical, if a person was 17 and they were to turn 18 the day before election day, then they would still be able to serve and qualify to be on the ballot. And that's my reading of the charter.
I think you might also get into, if you want to parse that out a little further, about whether or not you turn that legal age to serve on election day or just before you are sworn in, which is not necessarily the same day.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just kind of thinking that I'm asking, should you be old enough to vote on election day to serve?
I think it's 18.
That's I guess, I don't have any issue with the on election day, but not being registered to vote on election day or not
Can you
being
give
able
us
to.
some clarification about it, please?
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful. So, further study. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, I'm so sorry for being late, but are we just getting updates on the
Right.
review? So are we at a place of we're deciding whether to advance these or not?
No, there
Okay.
will be no vote taken today because I really would prefer to have more of our colleagues here
Okay.
to address this because this isn't small stuff. And so I wanted to offer an opportunity for staff to share with us the answers to the questions we asked last week, as well as give us an opportunity to offer more questions. And our colleagues will have access to this recording, and they'll be able to expedite their study of this and have the same opportunity that we have. I just don't want to have different opportunities for the.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm comfortable with that. And sorry to ask you to repeat it because
No,
I
it's
was late.
okay. It's okay. Okay, so
One
yes,
thing on that,
yes,
if
absolutely.
that's okay.
Sure.
I know in the last term, we had a 26-year-old, do you know from the history, or you may have to look into it, but from the history of council, have we had anyone that was sort of right on that threshold upon election, kind of what we're talking about now within the history of Metro Council?
We'd have to look at it. I don't have that answer.
Okay.
So that would be yet another question. Yes, Mr. Cash?
I got one more, sorry.
No, it's okay.
If we were going to change the age for council and for school board, would that have to be two separate ballot amendments?
It would be two, yes, because it would be two separate provisions.
Any other questions about this one at this point? Okay, then we will go ahead and let you continue and move on.
On the legislative veto process, we reached out to legal supports the amendment, and they said that they will assist in drafting the language.
Supported on what basis?
Supports it on the basis of simplifying the language as opposed to.
But not in the sense that they think it creates any kind of actual malfunction in the legislative process.
Yeah, it creates confusion.
Confusion if a mayor fails to actually veto something that he or she wants to veto.
Yeah, so right now, I think that where it's come up in the past is when a mayor has consistently not signed legislation that was passed and whether or not that was a veto, and so there was.
And the confusion is just related to the timing.
The timing, whether it has to be physically returned unsigned, or if just not signing it is sufficient, if that's an actual veto. So something to just kind of simplify
Sure.
it, is my understanding of what the ask was.
Do you have any idea of when they'll be able to provide us with initial wording?
I think that we could probably get the wording before the next meeting.
That would be great.
Yes.
Is it germane to discuss whether we should even ask them to do that work? I mean, in other words, if we all don't want that amendment to move forward, why ask them to draft the language?
We will open the floor for that discussion.
I mean, but I'm also comfortable waiting to discuss it with the larger group. I'm not necessarily making that motion, but I just
Well, we
wonder.
can't vote on it because we already said that we're not gonna do that today.
Okay.
So, but I think it's okay for us to offer any more questions or comments about that, that can be shared with our colleagues. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So I would be in favor of at least just getting the language so that we can consult with council, and provide our own interpretations onto how exactly it would operate. Because, I mean, I think it's, I'm not gonna say which way I'm leaning on this one, but I think it'd be important to at least be able to see what the language would look like and how it could potentially be interpreted. So I'm more than comfortable with waiting.
Mr. Cash?
I agree with Councilmember Preti.
As do I.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I just, yeah, sure.
Anybody have any other questions, comments about that? If you will, just ask them to get that to us in a couple of weeks so we know what we're looking at. Number 3, clarify interim finance director.
On this item, again, reached out to legal. They also support this amendment and would assist with drafting the language for the amendment. I think we talked about this a little bit last time with, if you look at the charter provisions related to the legal department, there is a provision in there specifically to have a deputy director who would act, it would, undertake all of the responsibilities of the director if there was an absence in the seat of the director. That does not exist for the finance department, and this issue came up last term, where there was a vacancy in the finance department, and it was kind of questionable, like who makes decisions, who acts, who does this long laundry list, who's responsible for the long laundry list of responsibilities that the finance director has. So this would either add a position or just designate one of the divisional directors as the person who acts in the stead of the finance director, if they were to, resign or be incapacitated for other reasons.
Is it a big lift for them to do 2 in 2 weeks?
I probably would think not, but I can ask.
That'd be great.
There was some discussion last time that there may be a legislative fix to this problem. Is it Metro Legal's opinion that there is not a legislative fix? As opposed, meaning a non-charter fix?
I think that it would be difficult to have that. So you're talking here, so the charter says that the director can delegate certain things to a divisional director. But we're talking about an instance where there is no director to do that delegation. So I don't know that there is a legislative fix. I think that a charter fix would be the cleanest way to do it. Right now, and this is what happened during the last time this happened, is there was a period of, 2 to 3 weeks or something where ostensibly everything kind of could have come to a halt. And we decided at the time that all of the actions that were needing to occur, signing contracts, signing legislation, that sort of thing, that the divisional directors could just undertake that because there was that vacancy. But the cleanest way to have that done is to make the change. So.
My inclination is to pursue fixes to actual malfunctions of the operation of the government. And so for this one, I would be very interested in seeing the language and learning a little bit more in depth what other remedies might be available, but I would be eager to see what they have in mind.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, let's move on to number 4. You want to go ahead and address that one?
Yeah, number 4, this is a request from the fire department about their personnel qualifications. Right now, the charter requires that all fire department personnel, quote-unquote appointees, be a citizen of the United States of America. This would open up that section to allow them to also be a permanent legal resident of the United States as well, so that they can kind of broaden their recruitment efforts to get people to into positions that they are needing to fill.
Can you compare this to Metro Police?
Yeah, so in 2022, there was an amendment to a similar provision in the police department that allowed them to follow the state law, whatever the state law allowed, which is broader than what our charter provided for. Here, we've been unable to track down a state law provision on that front, but making the designation of a permanent legal resident would kind of provide that broader cross-section of applicants, candidates.
Mr. Rutherford?
I know that with service in the military for non-citizens can be a fast track to citizenship. Do we know whether or not that could potentially play into someone serving in the fire department in similar fashion?
That service on the fire department would be a fast track to citizenship?
Yes.
I don't know what that interplay with federal law would look like. I can look and see, but I don't have an answer for you right now, but we can look into that.
Mr. Brett, to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be a question more for an immigration attorney, just because my understanding of our immigration code is that a lawful permanent, a lawful permanent resident is a separate category, or rather, let me ask my question. Is being a lawful permanent resident a separate category from those who have received deferred action as a childhood arrival?
I believe so.
Yes, I think so. I think that is a separate
I think that like
qualification.
I think that,
Standard.
I'm trying to look for the language. I believe, and I'm not an immigration attorney, but I believe that a lawful permanent resident is a category that you like obtain under immigration law. It's not like a catch-all term for anybody with legal status.
Mr. Cash?
I'm kind of interested in the same answer, or asking the same question, but I'm gonna ask it in a different way. Like, if this is the wording, who is being left out as a possible person who can help us save people and protect them? Like, who's being left out? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's worthy of research, please. Good question. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, let's move on to the next one. We'll get clarification.
Okay, no September council meetings. This kind of led us into, no September, whether there was an impact on the planning department. We heard back from planning, basically it would just require them to amend their deadlines, but because of notice requirements, it would be a greater hardship for them if we started having zoning hearings, on the second Tuesday of the month or something like that, if we were changing that around. So, because you'll remember that in January, that was a little bit of a difficulty for the planning department, not to mention the freeze that happened at the time. The second question was to determine whether an election year transition date can be added to the charter. This is a constitutional issue, and which provides that September 1st is the start date of anybody's term. And then there's the case of the runoff. So, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit last time. We have to hold our elections in August. If you are not elected at that August election, then we have a runoff that happens in September, and it has to happen between 30 and 45 days after the general election. So the people who are running in a runoff election would not be qualified for their seats until until the election is certified and they take an oath of office. So, we have a constitution that says September 1, and then we have this other provision that says we have runoffs that happen later. So it kind of puts, there's always going to be a stepped process there where we're going to have some people that have been elected and qualified, and we're going to have some people that are still not elected and qualified, which is generally why we take September off during that time. So there's still nothing that would require us to have a September meeting. We could take that off annually, but as far as setting a date certain in September for everybody to start their term, that would be in contradiction to the Constitution.
Well, so then the runoff process would seemingly be in conflict with the Constitution. I mean, if there's state statute sets a runoff.
Well, it's September 1st if you are qualified to take office. So on September 1st, if you're not qualified to take office because there's a runoff election, then you take office when you are qualified.
So that's how the mayor isn't sworn in on September 1st. Because the mayor's
Hasn't been
in
elected,
historic
yeah.
recent times has been elected pursuant to a runoff.
Yeah.
Well, how is it that, it might be Memphis or it might be Shelby County, but they swear in their mayor in, I think, was it January or December?
I don't know the answer to that question. This
Talk to me
is,
about that, and I did not research it.
I'm pretty sure that they do. I don't know how.
okay.
So you're saying that the state statute sets the general election in August, the first Thursday of August.
Yeah.
That's statutory.
Yeah, I think it's statutory.
And so because of that, any elected and qualified civil officers, which would presumably include Metro Council members and the mayor, have to be sworn in and take office on September 1st.
If they are
Unless they're
qualified.
not elected and qualified.
Correct.
So there's a statutory framework that allows for election after that. And so then those folks have a more flexible deadline for when they get sworn in.
After
it's
the,
your
after the
opinion.
certification, they can be
So-
sworn in that day.
Is that in the statute? So that's just customary.
Taking of the oath is the qualification.
But there's flexibility there. Like the mayor could,
As far
a
as,
newly
as far
elected
as I'm
mayor
aware,
could
yes, there's
decline
no
to do that
requirement.
for a couple extra weeks or whatever. So it's your opinion that we could not define a transition period?
I don't think that we can say that the members of council who were qualified as of September 1 are not council members until October 1. If that was the day, I'm just picking a date later.
Yeah.
I think that those members are council, because, the outgoing members are also council members until their successor is qualified.
So theoretically, if we had to have a special called meeting in September of an election year, some newly elected council members would be certified in office. Others would be holdovers. And we could,
Theoretically, yes, but remember, we also have to have 27 members to hold a council meeting. And if, a good portion of those are still in a runoff election, well, I guess the old ones could still be
officers
there,
would still
yeah.
be in office.
Yeah, it's
Like,
it's possible.
So theoretically, we could be meeting with like half newly
Are
elected.
you- Is that something you want?
I'm worried about that from a legitimacy standpoint. Yeah, like if we had to have if there was some actual reason that the council needed to meet special called in September, I think from a legitimacy standpoint, yeah, I think that's a problem. If the actual basis for that problem is the state constitution, then there may not be anything we can do about it. But it's good at least to clarify where the problem is, in my mind.
So I'm going to take Mr. Prepty, then Mr. Cash, then Mr. Rutherford.
So just by point of me being a nerd, I've got the provision of the state constitution pulled up. So it's Article 7, Section 5, which reads that elections for judicial and other civil officers shall be held on the first Thursday in August. Gonna ignore that year, and forever thereafter on the first Thursday in August, next preceding the expiration of their respective terms of service. The term of each officer so elected shall be computed from the first day of September next, succeeding his election. The term of office of governor and other executive officers shall be computed, that's not relevant. So that's the constitutional provision that that dictates that our terms begin on September 1st. But as far as because I believe that there's also an additional statutory definition within the Tennessee Code Annotated that I'm working on finding that specifically restricts county and metropolitan forms of government to when terms and everything start, so that could potentially be why Memphis is able to seat other folks at a different time.
That's kind of my working theory too, I'm trying to
Yeah.
research over here. Because the Memphis mayoral election in 2023 was on October 5th, and then there was a runoff in mid-November.
Because they're a municipality.
I think so.
Mr. Cash.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. First, I think that the just looking at this and seeing what's here, you know, the category or topic, no September council meetings, and then the description at the top provides that no council meetings are held in September of each year, and the discussion that we just had are pretty different. I think voters are going to be confused by that. If it's sold as no September council meetings versus fixing something that is an issue every 4 years. And I, risking getting into opinions here, like one of those I'm interested in doing and one of them I'm not. And let me add this, that because of the discussion we just had about the difference of swearing in dates and the, you know, some people in August, some people in September, I'm gonna go back to the first thing we talked about and say that I'm feeling that if we're gonna pursue an amendment about lowering the age, that the age be on election day. Makes more sense to me because of these different possible swearing-ins. And I think that just kind of alleviates any uncertainty about holdovers or anyway.
Mr. Rutherford.
My question is more for clarification on something that initially Ms. Margaret said. We've talked a lot about the dates in terms of the beginning of a term, but there's some confusion added in, something I heard that I thought I understood a certain way, and now I'm starting to question that, and that is when is the beginning of a term, or not the ending of a term, I should say, because my thinking was that the term ended with September 1st, but you're saying that potentially your term could actually go longer if there's not someone duly elected on September 1st.
So
my thinking was that it was vacant for that period of time.
So, and this is going down a road that we went down a couple, 6 months ago. But information that I have received from the legal department, who looks at this periodically also, is that council members at large do not hold over their position because they do not, they're not representing a specific district. They're council members at large, so they don't have the same. They don't have the same kind of term or holdover position that they need to hold. Anyway, they don't hold over. Just that. The district members, if they go to a runoff, then the first district member will hold over until the runoff, until the qualification occurs. Other than that, it's September 1.
Because my thinking for, and this is why I thought that in terms of why we initially did not meet in September of an election year, was because there was the potential for not being able to have a fully constituted council because of, I didn't think anyone held over. So, according to what you're saying, that's really not the reason for not meeting in September.
I think it's just because people are still onboarding, people are trying to, still run in runoff elections, and it's just, there's, I think, probably the constituents might be a little confused as to who their council member is at any given moment at that time while there's this transition period happening. So it is kind of, it feels like an extended transition period, but there are some specific, guidelines. But we would be down to 35, we wouldn't have a full 40-member, council at that time.
But you'd still have to get 27 of them, of the 35.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that distinction applies to an at-large member, but this isn't the forum to take that up exactly, but
True.
like, those are defined offices that should,
Well, so
that
this is
framework
what
should
it is,
still
I
apply.
think, is that when you're elected at large, there are 5 at-larges elected generally. So there's not an at-large one, you don't run for at-large
Yeah.
one.
Right.
You run for at-large. So I kinda think, I do wonder, if there's no at-large elected, do they hold over? Is that, maybe this is not the right form.
But
It might not be the right form for that, but just
But it's
kind
a
of
good
like
question.
thinking back to what happened at the last
Right.
transition, in the August election, we had one at-large elected.
Right. So
So that seat,
who would that
seat would have been
replace?
filled as of September 1.
Right,
She would take that office. But yeah, there's no, because we were getting the questions like, oh, well, do they replace the number 1 seat that was
Yeah.
outgoing at the time? And the answer is no, because you don't, you're not running for that number 1 seat or what have you. You are running for an at-large
Yeah,
position.
one of 5 seats.
One of 5. They are, while we internally kind of designate them 1, 2,
Yeah,
3,
1, 2,
4,
3, 4,
5 because of where they sit in the room, and the
there's
kind of the
no-
order of
Yeah, like there's at-large one for like purposes of like, I think like internal stuff. But the voters don't vote for this person as at-large
yes,
one.
You're just
So
voting.
with,
So
with
five
the one,
people.
I'm sorry, so with the one person who did win outright at large September 1, if there was a called council meeting right after that, would that person be seated for that meeting?
Their term would have started September 1. Yes.
So-
If you
so-
go to runoff.
So
the
that
term
person,
doesn't
but
start.
only that person of the at-large would be a participant, or
Here's-
eligible to participate in that meeting, okay.
Okay, here's my question, and this is just for clarity, I hope this never happens, but let's say there is, I'm gonna go back to your initial question, let's just say there is some sort of emergency and we don't have a September meeting, what circumstances would there be should we have to call that meeting in September and everything is in flux? What if we have, and you never know, out of 40 races, we have 19 that are still up in the air, and we have 5 members that clearly we've identified can't be onboarded, can't be qualified, can't sit in the meeting and vote. So does it end up being a mashup of some of the previous term and some of the current term? And is it written anywhere, this is a multitude, is it written anywhere that that would be unkosher?
I think that the district,
This is
yeah.
a lot of research you guys are giving us.
For something that's not really a real question. The district, council members would hold their position until their successor is duly elected and qualified.
Okay, so we'd have a mashup.
You'd have people from two different terms
Uh-huh.
seated in
Sitting-
one
sitting
council.
together.
I mean,
I would just certainly hope, and it may be worthy of a look-see, that there's nothing that prevents that from happening. Because in our current circumstance, and you never know what you don't know, it could happen. Mr. Cash.
Is-
Sorry about that.
Is
Just go
quorum
sit over.
defined in the charter or constitution? So if there are 3 or 4 not yet elected, at-large members, the quorum is still based on 40.
I believe the phrase is the membership to which the council is entitled.
Okay. And that's in the charter or state law?
Charter.
Okay.
Just quickly, I just wanted to point out that I had intended the transitional conversation to be distinct as a separate line item from the no meeting in September conversation. It arose from that conversation at the last meeting, but in the discussion, I think I have serious concerns with the lack of a defined transition. Sounds like that is not something that can be remedied by charter. It sounds like that's a defect in the state constitution and the statutory framework for when elections are held. So at best, we could, pass a resolution asking for amendment. But I think that framework isn't great for all the reasons that we've elucidated, but I think it is distinct from whether we should just choose not to meet in September.
Anybody else? Mr. Petit, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say sort of separate and separate, but also part and parcel to the current conversation is I generally think that this specific proposed amendment of no September meetings is of a net benefit not only just to council and to this quagmire that we're discussing as it relates to seating folks in runoffs, but allowing council members to sort of have a bit of a reprieve to get reconnected with the community, because things get hectic at times.
Is there a question there somewhere?
I can try and come up with one. Anyway, I'll cut it short. I'll simply say and express my support for this specific amendment.
We are so off the rails, but it's all good.
Yes.
Mr. Cash.
Hopefully quick question, based on the quagmire that we're
Not in
talking.
this room, at this table.
Based on the quagmire we're talking about, this really won't be relevant until August of 2027, is that correct? It doesn't need to be, that part of it doesn't need to be fixed until, we won't,
3
Talking
years
about-
to research
We've got
this.
time.
Yeah.
no, I'm not talking about research, I'm talking.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we've got time.
Okay.
There's no rush.
To try to set a transition date in the charter. Yeah.
That doesn't have, that, we will not have a problem with that until August of 2027, right? Right.
May I ask a question? Is it
Yes, you
possible
may.
to bring that out as a separate line item? Because I find this document of, historical discussion of proposed amendments to be really useful. And I would love for subsequent committees to this one to have it as a line item reflecting the research that the team has done, to pick up.
You're welcome to answer that.
If the committee desires, I can add it as its own line item.
Well then, can I move for that?
Except we're not voting.
Okay, well then
I
I'll,
mean, we have enough people. If I have somebody wants to suspend our rule early on, then we can suspend the rule and knock
well,
yourself out.
if that's something that can be done administratively without a vote, great. If not, I'll notice everyone that I intend to move for that at the next meeting.
What is your comfort level, ladies?
That's an administrative issue for me to just simply make a second line item, and I'm happy to do that, yeah.
I noticed some other ones have made it onto the list, so it seems like that could be
useful.
Right-click and
Okay.
add,
Yeah, get the
add
data
cell,
line.
Cool.
add
yeah,
cells.
add row.
Well, I think that's useful because I think these are distinct issues.
Anybody have a big problem with that? Great.
I agree.
Change council meeting days.
Okay, this is another one that kind of took a left turn at the last meeting. The original idea was to move the council meetings to the first and third Wednesday of the month rather than Tuesday of the month. And then we got into discussing having committee meetings on the off, not on council meeting weeks. And then I've kind of interjected that we've been talking internally about some changes to the pacing of council meetings. And so it was requested that we do kind of a flow chart. Flow chart isn't exactly what we came up with, but there is a chart in the back of your packet that that kind of demonstrates, it's a side-by-side that kind of shows what the current pacing is, and if we added in an additional time so that you could have your committee meetings to discuss legislative items that were not coming up on the agenda an hour later, so that you would have a little bit more time to discuss it, and then they would come back on the full floor agenda at the following meeting. So we kind of add an extra meeting in there for committee discussion of legislative items. But you can see the pacing in this schedule here. You know, the upsides, I think, are that council members have a little more time to dive in, ask questions of departments, reconvene, defer to another committee date to have these discussions before you're just walking down the hall to go to a council meeting to vote on it. The downsides are that it will take longer for legislation to get through our process. So resolutions essentially at a minimum would come before 2 council meetings as opposed to the 1, and ordinances would essentially take 4 council meetings to get approved, assuming no deferrals in there.
And I'll also say a potential downside is that you will pretty much be thinking about twice as much legislation as you're currently thinking about. And I would say to kind of, one thing that's about to happen is this is similar to what's happening with the board and commission. So that might be maybe a good test case to kind of see how that goes. Because, for example, say there's 10 members, or say there's 10 bills that you're considering, and those are, you have them in committee, and those will be in 2 meetings, this meeting we're considering them in committee, but they won't be voted on until next meeting. You will have 10 additional resolutions that you're gonna be voting on that night that you were not discussing in committee, that you discussed 2 weeks prior at the prior meeting. So you're kind of spending your afternoon talking about legislation that's not being voted on that night.
Anybody have any questions? Mr.
But,
Cap?
and just one more thing
Yes.
before we get off the topic, go into questions. This is not a charter issue.
That was thank you. That's where I was going.
It's a rules issue. So it's something that was generated at the last meeting, and we were requested to give you what the alternative pacing could look like. It's, we've done that now, so.
So will you be pulling that off, or do we need to vote to pull that off at the next committee meeting?
We can move it down to not considered.
We can move it down to not considered with an item that it was an administrative move. Note that's an administrative move and not a vote of the committee.
Okay, let's do that.
Very briefly,
Sure.
so I agree, I don't favor moving this forward now, but I also think it should be under consideration to stagger committees and council, such that they're, it's not that the committee meetings are for, on a Monday, Tuesday, for the council meeting 2 weeks away, but that there's a committee week and a council week and a committee week and a council week, such that we're not thinking about twice as much legislation, to borrow a phrase, but that we are doing the committee meetings a week before the council meeting instead of the day before or the hour before. And that's for the rules committee, and I just wanted folks who weren't at the last meeting to know that I think that is a potential,
And we might be able to kind of run that scenario too.
a potential benefit to this line of thinking.
It becomes problematic for resolution.
Any other questions? Comments? Seeing none, we will move forward to the next one. Change proposed budget deadline.
Okay, so, heard back from finance on this, and, they also referenced that it had been done once before, where it used to be May 1, it was moved to March 15, and then subsequently was moved back to May 1, all by charter amendments. So this one, puts it at April 1st. I've been told by finance that this would potentially pose problems with revenue projections because of some of the information that they rely on to make those revenue projections. They're not getting it until April. They're not getting final numbers until sometime in April. So, right now I think they're done with their revenue projections for the upcoming, budget process. But, they work on them up until that date. So, they were not huge fans of this. So.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on.
Council pension eligibility. So, two questions came up, and I guess that was what the financial impact could be. One of the questions is, it kind of depends on what the vesting looks like, and what the salary range looks like. If you look at what the salary currently is, then the annual financial impact could be somewhere between like $123,000 to $148,000 a year after people vest, further and are able to draw on their pension. I don't know how well you all are familiar with the pension rules, but there's this thing called the Rule of 85, which means that in order to get a full non-reduced pension, an employee has to meet this combination of years of service plus age. And so if you think about 20 years of service, the easiest way to think about it is 20 years of service plus the age of 65, you can draw your full retirement benefits down. I don't think that would apply to council members if we were looking at a vesting period of 8 years. But if you look at a vesting period of 10 years, you still would never, I guess you could meet the rule of 85 if you took full retirement at 75 and only had the 10 years of service. Anyway,
So use me as an example for just a minute.
Sure.
I'm 68.
Mhm.
I've already served 8 years. I'm gonna serve another 4, that's 12 years. In the next 4 years, when it's over, I'll be 72. What do I get, $10.23?
Well, it's not a lot, and rather than looking at the financial impact from what does a council member get at retirement, we were more looking at it as a impact to the system. So looking at it as a whole and what the cost to Metro would be versus what the individual council member would make.
But my point is this a big enough deal? Is this gonna make that much of an impact on the whole or the few? And is this self-serving? So those are all my questions. And then I will open the floor to anybody else. Mr. Cash.
I am going to assume that since we have something that's kind of hanging out there in the legal system, that determining the financial impact is going to be, or what that financial impact is going to be very different if you have 40 versus if you have 20, correct? And I'll just say if we have 20 that's considered a full-time council, I would feel differently about this amendment, and I'll leave it at that.
There's also different considerations to make, and aside from the fiscal impact, there's some different considerations that we would have to go through to determine, the eligibility as an employee. Right now, the people that are eligible to benefit from the the retirement system are people who work 40, essentially, clock in 40 hours a week, and, kind of, I hate to use the word suffer, but, suffer the obligations of employment versus, people who are, members of the legislative body that you're not required to work a 40-hour week, and even if we get into this whole conversation about full-time versus half-time or part-time employment, a part-time employee would work, ostensibly 20 hours a week, and, there's no minimum requirement of hours for council members to put into the work that you do. So there's kind of that side of the coin too, as far as like the obligations of employment and what is the eligibility of an employee who's going to participate or be a member of the pension system.
Hannah?
Well, and Margaret was talking about it earlier, but I think to calculate the financial, impact is really gonna depend on the details of when you all vest. Because if it's after 8 years, a lot of council members get to 8 years. Not a lot of council members get to 12 years. If you were a full-time Metro employee, you would vest at 10 years. So, if you, I think that really does change the math, because a lot of people get to 2 terms of service somehow. But that would get you vested under normal Metro, vesting rules. So if you bump that up to 10 or 12 years, I think you get a lot fewer council members who would qualify for that. So probably a less significant cost. But fewer council members would get the benefit.
Exactly. Anybody have any other questions about this one? Okay. Mr. Prepty, you look like you're coming up with one.
Yeah, so like for, I mean, this is sort of just getting into the nitty-gritty of how it would operate, of just like, even if just like making it, at least just like making the time that a person serves on council go towards the vesting period. So if somebody served 4 or 8 years on council, and then when it worked for the sheriff's department or the DA's office or something, having the time on council count towards the time that they're also serving Metro in a separate capacity as an employee. I think that would be within the realm of, well, let me ask the question. Is that, how are we envisioning this provision operating? Like, would it operate as I described, or?
It depends on the conversation. I think some of the questions that come up, like Hannah was just saying, are when does vesting occur?
Yeah.
Is it something that is, the years of service contribute or can link up to, for persons who go take a position with Metro after as a full-time employee, or?
Yeah, or is there some kind of multiplier that gets put in? I mean, so the mayor.
There's also there's a charter requirement for a study and formulating committee to be convened once every 5 years. And one of the things that they do, and this goes back to the original study and formulating committee, is determine what the benefit plan looks like. And, they determine eligibility requirements, and they determine vesting requirements and whatnot, and make those recommendations to the council. So it could be something that, needs to be reviewed by that committee that hires, an actuary to look at, the types of questions like that. Like, would you want those years of service to link up to future years of service? So again, looking at the full-time versus part-time is a question too.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
sorry, to just go to that point of kind of like, it is whatever you guys, well, I mean, there's some limitations, but it's kind of like what you guys want. There is in the charter a pension for the mayor. The mayor's pension kicks in after serving 2 full terms, and it's equivalent to 10% of his or her salary during the last year of their second term. And then it predates term limits, because then it goes into 3, if you serve 3 full terms, then it's 25% of the last year of the third term. So there's kind of different ways to think about it potentially. maybe it is service, you know, it could be that 8 years equals 8 years, it could be that 8 years in council equals 4 years of Metro service. There's lots of different iterations that it could be.
Mr. Rutherford?
My question relates to, actually to healthcare. We had that whole healthcare debate in the last term. So if there was a pension, would that then need to be tied to healthcare? In other words, if you got a pension, you're eligible to carry the healthcare. If you don't have a pension, then you're not. And is that the way that it works for employees? If a Metro employee leaves and they're not eligible for a pension, are they eligible in any way to carry over health care, or does that tie to their pension?
So if an employee leaves before retirement date, I think it kind of depends on your date of employment too. If an employee leaves before their retirement date, I'm gonna get into an area that I know enough about to be a little bit dangerous. I believe you can, it's deferred vesting for healthcare. So if you are not yet retiring from Metro, you go work somewhere else. If you have vested in the pension plan, if you've made your 10 years, when you do decide to retire, I think that you can, buy into to Metro's health insurance. This all may have changed somewhat recently with the whole switch over to Medicare, and I don't know the details of that anymore. So again, I'm saying enough to be a little dangerous here, so I'm just gonna zip it, and I can find an answer for you.
Any more yes, Mr. Cash?
I want to say I was thinking about and appreciate Councilmember Petit's question about like council members who go on to serve in other roles in Metro government and taking that into account. And I just do want to point out that Metro school employees are in a different pension system, and state government employees are in a different pension system than Metro employees. So I just want to remind folks of that.
Anybody have anything to add? Question? Okay, let's move on to our next one. Police charter amendment.
We reached out to the legal department on this also, and it's their opinion that the current charter amendment would not, and the current charter, not amendment, the current charter provision would not allow the council to set policy, and it's been the opinion of the council office in the past that the council could not set police operational or personnel policies.
Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, we will move on. Got anything else to add? That's the last one.
Yeah, that was the last one.
So that is the last one. Everything else has been managed. Mr. Cash?
I want to ask a question kind of delicately. And I don't want us to come up with like a definitive answer to this, but if it's not something we should discuss, then you feel free to let me know and I won't take offense to it. But, in discussing this, charter amendments and the transit referendum and the election that has a lot of offices in November, the word ballot fatigue has come up, and being nervous about giving voters too much to take in. And I just wondered if we wanted to have any sense of what that might look like without coming with a solid number, like when do we hit ballot fatigue?
So let me just offer one of the things, and that's been a real concern.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I'm looking at with Margaret and Hannah and several others is the next question that we ask once we've kicked out a couple of more of these that we think we're going to kick out. Do we then say, okay, looking at this, is our one question criteria, what's the rush? Is there a rush is there an emergent need? If there's an emergent need and it needs to be on there, does this rise to that level? I would love to entertain other comments about what those criteria should be, and we do have it on our list of things to do, but we wanted to have generic conversation and start weeding things out. But I think it's worthy to have the conversation about what do we want those criteria, for lack of a better word, or defining questions that can help guide us in moving forward, because voter ballot fatigue's a thing. It's a thing. You looked like you wanted to ask something or say something.
Oh, no, just thinking. Yeah, I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Mr. Gadd.
Generically, I feel my inclination is to consider moving things forward to the ballot that fix actual malfunctions in the operation of the metro government. And things that relate to elections and transition periods and so on and so forth. Both, we have another general election, and it's likely that we'll have a lot more actionable information about whether the General Assembly can restructure our council contrary to the charter or not, which would and should play in really pretty directly into all of those questions. But the one about, vacancies in director positions, to me, that one does present an actual problem in our operations that probably is timely, whereas in my view, the rest of them don't. And where I come from on this is that I'm a large supporter of the transit referendum, and I think it's, in my view, important that that pass, and that the way I come at it is that I don't want to fracture the coalition necessary to pass the transit referendum. Others will take a different view on that, but that's where I come from, and I think if we have an opportunity to fix malfunctions in the charter, I'm for that. Otherwise, I'm for probably further study in light of what kind of council we have.
Anybody else have any comments to add, questions? Anything, y'all wanna add anything about that? Yes.
Actually, yeah, I've asked this
Sure.
before and I don't remember the response. I think I remember the response, sort of. On the ballot, what comes first? Charter amendments or transit referendum? And if we don't know, who decides? The election commission?
I think the election commission
I
would
think it's
decide.
the election commission. I asked this question to Nikki Ecke. Let me see if I've got it.
While she's looking for that, does anyone know how many charter amendments have been on ballots previously where we felt like it was a little much? So like, when do we reach that number?
So we actually have the list. Margaret, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I know I was making a little face. I know 2022, we had a lot of items on the
Yeah.
ballot. So I don't remember the exact number, but I know there were quite a few. And there were
Four?
and one of them was huge.
Yeah.
Pages and pages and pages
Yeah,
to read through.
I remember there being a really long one, I just couldn't remember that,
And there
how
were-
many there were.
There were state constitutional amendments on the ballot
Yeah.
Okay.
as well.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
yeah. I feel like there's been a conventional wisdom about this that's been talked about before, but I can't remember what it is. I mean, I wanna say that it's 4 or 5 is
Keep it
is
short.
the most that you can do. Do what?
Keep it short.
Yeah.
That's what I've
And
always
short
been told.
ones.
Just keep it short.
Short ones, yeah, and not too many, cause the more you put on, the harder it's gonna be.
Because we had that Article 19 amendment that was
Yeah, that
really
was long.
lengthy in 22.
And people stop reading.
I mean, I think a lot of people will, cut to the
To the
the
question,
summary
yeah.
Right.
of what the amendment is about, but sometimes those can be lengthy too.
That's not to say that we don't do hard things. That's to say that we do them smart, not necessarily hard. Anybody else?
I'm just generally of the opinion, the easier that we can make it for the voting public, the better.
I agree. Anybody else have anything? Okay, our next meeting date is, May 2nd.
It's already almost May.
And is that a date we should be expecting to take votes on whether
We
to
will take
advance
votes
these or
that
not? And so we wouldn't need to meet on May 9th unless we don't make a decision on May 2nd.
Correct.
So we're giving an extra push to get folks here. for
I will be
May 2nd.
sending a letter through Margaret to everybody as a reminder of the urgency of being here and deliberating and doing our job. Anybody else have anything? Going once? Going twice?
Yeah.
Mr. President?
Well, just an idea, maybe, forcing it onto their, like, actual council calendar so that they have a reminder buzzing them to be present, I don't know.
Well, we were discussing that before you came in, because, you know, we have the internal legislative calendar, and if you've opted into it, it should show up on your calendar. But I don't know all the ins and outs of Outlook and how that works, so.
I also do not know how that works.
But somebody could schedule this as a meeting with an RSVP for,
Right.
like we did Saturday, we were sent for the Diane Nash event, we were sent.
I can get Danielle to send something out to everyone that's, yeah. I don't know if you wanna do that in conjunction
I
with your
will, yeah.
email
Yes.
to everyone, but,
That would be
well,
perfect.
it might be better to have an email that's separate from the calendar invitation, cause calendar invitations to find text is kinda difficult
Oh,
sometimes.
that's fine then.
Go away.
I mean, either way, it's gonna get
Yeah.
written by Monday, so we'll get it out. And probably tomorrow. Anybody else have anything? Last chance. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Better not.
Motion
Y'all have a good evening.